I want to tell you a little bit about my background, and then I'll get into the actual slides in the presentation. Please, especially since we have the luxury of a small group, feel free to ask a question as it comes up. I do plan on leaving a big Q&A time at the end, but we're a nice small group, so we can keep it very conversational. Tell you a little bit about myself. I've been an art therapist for 17 years now, and every time I say it, I have to add that it sounds like a really long time when I say it out loud, because in my head, I'm like just out of grad school, and every time I have to say that number, I'm like, oh, it's hard. But how many of you guys had never heard of art therapy before this? Okay, so I'm impressed, because usually that's most of the people are like, so, it's interesting for me. Like I said, I've been doing this for 17 years. And so as the years go by and I talk to people, I've seen that change. I used to say all the time, I promise I'm not making this up. This is an established profession. It's not something that I'm creating myself. So art therapy, as the name implies, is a therapeutic discipline. It is a mental health profession, but art and art making are really at the core of it. And I just want to pause for a second, because I know I talked to you guys briefly before, and to you. Are you my other art therapist?
I'm not a certified art therapist, but I am an art therapy enthusiast.
Okay, great. Oh, I love that title, art therapy enthusiast. Okay, yeah. Great. We have a new title. So welcome.
Thank you.
So I got into art therapy basically because I'm very indecisive, and I love art and I love psychology. And I didn't know which one to choose. And when it came time to go to grad school, I discovered art therapy, and I went, oh, that's perfect. I still don't have to choose yet. I can do both. And it's been a really great marriage of two passions for me. And it's been a really fascinating career and job, and I'm really excited to be able to tell you guys a little bit more about it. I'm going to step over here so that I can move my slides. So, what is it? I mentioned briefly what it is, but I'm going to give you the formal definition, which, believe it or not, according to the American Art Therapy Association, it's now 2 paragraphs long. So I'm just going to give you the first paragraph, and it says, art therapy is an integrative mental health and human services profession that enriches the lives of individuals, families, and communities through active art making, the creative process, applied psychological theory, and human experience within a psychotherapeutic relationship. That's a lot. But if we unpack it, it's about enriching the lives of people through art. And depending on who you're working with and your strengths and their needs, that might mean going to a gallery like the Frank with your clients and viewing art. That's something I've done personally myself, where I've taken patients that I work with in a group and said, you know what, we're planning an outing and we're going to the art museum or the art gallery, and we're going to take a tour. And that's a great resource that helps people kind of open up their idea of what art is. It helps people open up their idea of what they can do, if they can do this thing called art that I'm asking them to do when they come in and sit down. So it could be looking at art. It could be actually engaging people in making art, which it usually is. And then that's wide open, right? That could be sewing and textiles and painting and clay and drawing and collage. Again, dependent on who you're working with. But I'll tell you a little bit, we'll stick with the profession of it for now. So that's the definition. What's the current state of this profession? Psychology is considered a young science. Art therapy is an even younger profession. So we're under 100 years for sure as a profession. Right now, however, it has been growing for several years. A few years ago, Monster.com, I think that's the job, one of those job resume websites, they named us as one of the hot jobs, I think was the title, kind of growing trends. And when I was preparing the presentation, I looked that up just to see, if that had changed at all. And it's still, when you research it, you still get information that says the job prospects are, quote, excellent. Because overall, the acceptance of the fact that we are integrated beings and we have this, mind, body, spirit connection is growing, and healthcare is becoming more and more inclusive of all kinds of modalities, and might seem counterintuitive, but the trend towards really evidence-based interventions and the trend towards doing things that get results quickly actually helps art therapy and art-based interventions in a lot of ways. Sometimes we are stereotypically not the number crunching scientists doing the research and getting the nice hard numbers to give to funders, but our interventions often get results very quickly because, as I was sharing with some of you before, we have a back door that we can go in. So if I was a therapist, verbal talk, a traditional therapist, and a client came in and sat down, I might say, how are you doing? I have a teenager at home, so if any of you have ever asked a teenager, how are you doing? You don't get a lot back to that, right? Even if you may have had an awful day today. You may have gotten off a terrible phone call right before you came in. And if we said, how are you doing? What would most of us say? Fine. So, however, if I said, here are 5 magazine pictures, can you pick out the one that matches how you're feeling and glue it onto your paper, you are a lot more likely to express how you're really feeling that way. It's just a little back door. You're not used to using art and visual things as a language, so you don't defend as well. So for us, that's great. That means we can help our clients get past their defensive and get to things a lot more quickly. Oh, and numbers-wise, there are currently 5,000 professional members of the American Art Therapy Association. That isn't a huge number nationwide, but it's also not all the art therapists in the nation. It does give you some indication. And I know everybody likes when you're talking numbers, what's the money? So the data says that the salary ranges anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000 a year, depending on where you're working and in what capacity. I'll say personally, I find it to be a really flexible profession. I've worked full-time in psychiatric hospitals, I've worked part-time, I've worked for myself, so it is a great flexible thing that way. So where did this marriage come from? Came from art education and psychotherapy, finding out that there was a lot of overlap there. So what was happening was art teachers were realizing that there was some real therapeutic benefit, and their students and their kids were drawing things that were emotional and that were impactful. And you had people starting to pay attention to the unconscious and imagery and symbols. First we had Freud, then we had Jung, and then all the prominent therapists who came after him. Now there was this whole idea of what imagery means and what dreams mean and what about these pictures in our unconscious. And so those two kind of naturally grew together, and that was the genesis for art therapy. And there continues today to be some overlap between artists, art educators, and art therapists, because underlying all of that is that we all know that there's something beneficial to making and creating art. So some of the places that an art therapist might work: in hospital settings. There's a very successful, there are more than one, but one that I can think of off the top of my head. There's a very successful program called Tracy's Kids that is run by an art therapist, was founded by an art therapist named Tracy Council, and she works in hospitals with children with cancer. There's some specific things you have to consider if you're going to work in a medical setting, like infectious disease control. So I mentioned I worked in a psychiatric hospital. We still had to think about the fact that we were part of a hospital and germs, and that happens with art materials. So I might need to consider the mobility of the clients I'm working with. What can I take to the bedside? And the hospital might have protocols about infectious disease that mean, what do I do with that paintbrush after that person's used it? Probably I don't want to use maybe clay that's moist and can keep all those germs in after everybody touches it. But it is not uncommon for art therapists to work in a medical setting, either with children or with adults. You see it also a lot in hospice settings and in cancer treatment centers. So this gentleman on the back of his shirt, he's got DOC, Department of Corrections. Art therapists also work in prisons. I base these basically on colleagues that I know and where they work. And so I have another colleague who has made a name for himself bringing art therapy into the prison system. In Florida, he's based out of Tallahassee. And again, that's not unique, but it's a great indicator of some of the programs that are out there. It's rehabilitative, it's therapeutic, and sometimes it can actually become part of a case. He's had instances where he's been asked to testify about artwork that someone has done. This photograph you can see in the corners from National Geographic. That is a veteran wearing a mask that he painted and created in an art therapy program. The National Intrepid Center of Excellence is the facility that he was a patient at, where he created that mask, and it was profiled in National Geographic maybe about a year ago. And I always think, I know the young lady who does the art therapy there, and I always think, I can't imagine walking into work every day under a sign that says, I work at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. That's pretty, that's confident. We're intrepid, and we are a center of excellence. But if you're interested or intrigued by that, I encourage you to Google art therapy in veterans. It is very impactful to use art and imagery in dealing with trauma and its aftermath. And art therapy with veterans is a pretty well-researched, well-established program. And the art therapist who facilitates this program, her name is Melissa Walker. You can actually see her TED Talk. Art therapy with the elderly and clients with Alzheimer's. Those are my peeps. That's my favorite population to do art therapy with. Again, it can be really therapeutic. Art therapy, even if you're using, he's got a paintbrush. Hi, come on in. Excuse me. It's okay, come on in. Hi. So that gentleman's using a paintbrush, but there's still sensory input. If you've ever written with a pen, I was having this conversation with someone about some of our students. I have a student that I cannot get him to do math with a pencil no matter what. And it bugs me because then he's scratching out because he can't erase. I'm like, who does math with a pen? And he's like, I hate the way it feels when the pencil's writing on the paper. There's sensory input. We all have a favorite pen, right? And that's why, because there's sensory input that you're getting back. So if you're painting with a paintbrush, just because you're not finger painting doesn't mean you're not getting some sensory stimulation from the art material that you're using. So sensory input is one reason that art therapy can be really helpful. And particularly with an elderly population or a population with dementia, that sensory input can be really valuable. Schools. Miami-Dade County Public Schools has an art therapy department. Come on in. Hi, welcome. We all did our favorite dance at the beginning to introduce ourselves.
No, that was sad. The lady told me it was sad.
Oh, come on in. No, I'm just teasing. Have a seat. Welcome home. So we're fortunate that we live in South Florida. That's not very common to have a school district with a dedicated team of art therapists. I have worked at that school system in the past, and it's wonderful. There are 15 to 20 art therapists, and they get assigned to specific schools. And within that school, you get a specific caseload of students. And art therapy is part of what's called their IEP, their Individualized Education Plan. Art therapy for addiction and recovery. South Florida, if you don't know it, is a very popular location for recovery and treatment centers. Outpatient centers, as well as residential treatment programs that people reside at, live at, so that they're safe and they can't go out and relapse and get treatment during the day. And art therapy is very popular in those settings. It's another setting that I have been lucky enough to work in. Hi. Welcome, come on in.
Sorry.
No problem at all. With that population, art can be helpful in a number of ways, one of which is just giving another recreational opportunity. You know, if I've been using a substance, I haven't had a lot of experience building other things I can do for fun and relaxation and for stress relief, and that's a great opportunity for that. And it's a great outlet for stress so that I don't let my stress build up and then I'm more likely to use or to relapse. And that's private practice. There are many art therapists in private practice who choose, you know, what area they specialize in. Eating disorders. There are a couple eating disorder treatment centers down here, Oliver Pyatt and Renfrew, and they also have art therapists in-house who work with their clients. And again, you know, recovery treatment. So wide range. I mentioned that I have a learning center. I have a learning center in the Tamarack, Fort Lauderdale area, and we get a lot of students who are on the autism spectrum or who have ADHD and other challenges. And I do make sure that art is part of what they're exposed to and what they receive. One reason is because art therapy tends to be strength-based, and most therapies are not. Just by definition, other therapists aren't mean, they're not trying to see your strengths. But if I go to a doctor, I go to a therapist, we're gonna talk about what's wrong with me, right? What are my symptoms? What are the deficits? What are you not good at? If I bring you in and I ask you to create with me, I have to start with what you can do, right? I'm not gonna bring you into art therapy and say, well, listen, we're not gonna paint because you can't hold a paintbrush. I'm gonna bring you in and say, what can you make? Oh, you know what we can do? And I'm gonna start from what you're able to accomplish. And so a strength-based approach that by itself can be really transformative for clients. They get a different identity. When I worked in the school system, I had a student that I used to see, and he was in my office one day, and we were making a piece of art because we had read a poem that was by Tupac Shakur, and we were making a piece of art based on it, and I turned to him and I said, do you think your teachers would be surprised to know that you were sitting in my office reading poetry? And he was like, yes, miss, they would, you know, because he was the kid who was in my office because he'd been kicked out of class yet again, you know, and so there are a lot of systems and where people are set up where the focus is always on what they can't do. And when you can turn that around and show them what they can do, like I said, no matter what else happens, that alone can be really, really impactful. So yes, I think I have the best job ever. I have a lot of friends, you know, who do all these corporate jobs, and we get together and they're all like, this meeting and this merger, and I'm like, I got the best color pencils yesterday. So it is really, if you guys are thinking of changing careers or you know people who are looking for careers, it's really a great, exciting field to go into. I really encourage people to try it out, check it out.
You get a degree? You have to get a degree?
You do have to get a degree. So that was perfect. If this is like, wow, how do I do this? Let's talk a little bit. So there's two facets to becoming an art therapist that I would like people to know about. One's the training and degrees that are required, and the others are the extra certifications and licenses. And one reason that I talk about this whenever I talk about art therapy is not only like on the off chance that someone in the audience is like, I want to go be an art therapist, but also on the chance that you guys might be on the receiving end for yourself or for a loved one of looking for therapy. And I want you all to be really educated consumers on that, okay? So therapists, first of all, we're human beings. You have to find the one that you click with, right? Not everybody likes every doctor that they get referred to. Not everybody's gonna like or click with the first therapist they get referred to. But for art therapy in particular, you wanna make sure that that person really has that credential, and we'll talk about why that's a little trickier for us. So you should have a master's degree in art therapy to call yourself an art therapist and to say that you practiced art therapy. It's its own master's degree, okay? Since art therapy is not that much of a familiar term, what does that even mean? That means to get that master's degree, you're going to take some psychology courses. So you're going to take a lot of the same coursework that a licensed mental health counselor or a licensed clinical social worker is going to take. You're going to know what the different disorders are, what's the criteria for them. You're going to know how do you do a group, what are the dynamics, the psychological theories. You're going to take some coursework specific to art therapy. Where does that overlap come in? If you go to an art therapist, there's a rationale why they chose the activity that they're asking you to do and the media that they're asking you to do, and why they didn't choose something. I've had many experiences where I've had organizations reach out to me. There was an organization here in South Florida that reached out to me and said, I'd like to come do a talk for all the parents and community members. And they called me back and said, do you think instead you could come and talk to our art teachers? And I said, sure, but why? And they said, well, we got this grant to do art after school in homeless shelters. And I could already see it coming, and it had never dawned on them that kids in homeless shelters might have any challenges or behavioral or emotional issues. So they took these art teachers and threw them in to this setting, and these well-meaning art teachers went in and tried to do all this work, and the kids were just overwhelmed, and the kids were melting down, and the kids were freaking out. And they were like, we need to know, how do we plan for this group? What do we need to do? What structure do we need? What materials should we use or avoid? So there is a rationale to it. So there's some specific coursework that we take. And of course, we have to have some experience with art materials. We don't want to ask you to make something or use, a media that I've never used. We do have to do internships, complete internship experiences. In my particular case, I did 2. And supervision. So supervision means, and I don't know how many other professions do this, but I know the mental health professions do. So you went to school, you got your degree, you did your internship where you had someone there supervising you for however many hours. You graduated, they were like, you did it, you made it, you graduated, and you're still not done. You have to have a certain amount of hours of supervision, which means, what's your name?
Carla.
Let's say Carla is already an established art therapist, she's already certified, she's already done, and I'm out of grad school. I would come to Carla and say, I need supervision. So I've graduated and I have a job where I'm working with clients, but I need to meet with you, Carla, once a week and tell you, these are the cases that I have, this is where I think I might be stuck, and you're gonna give me feedback, and we're gonna do that for, I forget what it is now, like I said, it's been 17 years, I don't know, 300 hours, and you're gonna sign off. So that's another step in the process if you wanna become an art therapist. So, do all those hoops. Depending on the state you live in. Then there's licensing or certification, just like any doctor that you go to. I mean, if we go, I went and got my nails done to come and talk to you guys. That person has to have a license from the state of Florida, right? So states license certain professions as a way to really protect the public. That's a way to say the person who hung up their shingle and says that they're doing this has met some minimum, and we know what their training is, we know what they're capable of, we know you're safe to go see them for that service. Art therapists are not licensed in all states. So that's why I want you guys to know all this stuff. So that in Florida, if you find yourself as a consumer or you're trying to help someone in your family, seek some mental health counseling, and you decide for some reason art therapy might be a great fit, or they hear of an art therapist, you know to ask some questions. Because in the state of Florida, you guys could leave tonight and be like, I went to an art therapy workshop, I'm an art therapist. Now, I know you won't. And really, it's not that, nobody's really to that extent. But the fact is, we don't have what's called title protection by law. Good news is, the ethics of any professional body trumps the law. So it doesn't matter if the law says I can or can't do something. My ethics for my profession supersede that. If the standard of my ethics is higher than the standard of the law, that's what I have to go with. So you still have those ethical guidelines to help professionals know what, they should and shouldn't do. But for you guys to know. So we're not licensed in all states. We're not licensed in Florida right now, or yet, I should say. I'm sure that it will come. We do have a national credentialing body. So we have a membership organization and we have a credentialing board. So just like your nurses have to take an exam that has to be independent and they have to pass, we have to do the same. So those are the credentials that you would want to look for. You would want to see someone who has after their name an ATR, BC, and we didn't want to have to write RAT after our name, registered art therapist, so it's art therapist registered, and BC for board certified. So again, just to help you guys, either as you're, maybe thinking about doing this as a profession or as a consumer. Any questions right here or yet? We'll stop again at the end, but anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can you study art therapy in Miami or Broward or anywhere in Florida?
You can in Florida. You can study art therapy in Tallahassee at FSU. The program has a wonderful reputation in our field. I know professionally and personally some of the faculty there, and they're really great, and I always recommend it wholeheartedly to people. They've really grown the program. You can actually now get your PhD in art therapy there. You cannot go to a brick and mortar school here in South Florida right now for that degree, unfortunately. At one time, Barry University did offer the program. That's actually where I got my degree. I had recently moved back to South Florida and I was going to go get a degree in social work at Barry, and I went to the open house and they said, okay, now you need to go to the office and pick up the paperwork. And part of the standard paperwork was a list of all the degree programs, and it starts with an A, so it was at the top, art therapy, and I was like, wow. So I got my degree at Barry, but the program was only open really briefly. So they just graduated like one class of us, because it's like a 3-year, process. So they opened the program, but I hadn't even graduated yet when they decided they were going to close it. But they, graduated us all. But there are distance learning programs that you can do.
But do you feel those are worthwhile if you sort of have to be very hands-on?
I think if you do, I know St. Mary of the Woods has a distance learning program. You're nodding, right? You know that?
I've done it, yeah.
Yeah.
I've looked at it.
Yes, yeah. They, again, have a good reputation. What happens is you do some of your coursework that way. And even for like the PhDs in art therapy, because I've, over the years kind of looked into it, and some of the PhD programs you can do distance learning, and it's not truly 100% distance learning, but it's mostly distance, and then you're required to come on campus for 2 weeks or whatever it might be at a specific time, and then you're still required to do your, get yourself an internship, which you could do in your area. And that's why I know about those programs, because I would get calls sometimes from students saying, I'm in this distance learning art therapy program and I need an internship, and I'm, contacting art therapists in the area to do that. So unfortunately, there's not a terribly convenient, right around the corner, brick and mortar program. But yes, if you go to one of those programs, and you can check and see if a program is accredited. So we do have a whole committee and a whole body that looks at what's being taught and what the standards are, and signs off on programs. So they can't just be like, even if they're distance, they still have to meet some of that criteria. So, any other questions? Yeah.
Or is it only the process? Is it only through graduate school, master's degree? What do most of the people that you think in undergraduate, what are typically their majors?
That's a great question. Typically, you either get psychology majors or you get studio art majors. And one of the reasons it's so important to have some group of professionals monitoring the programs and what they are offering and teaching is because of that variation of backgrounds. So depending on where your graduate degree is from, for example, Pratt offers an art therapy degree. Well, Pratt is an art school, School of Art and Design. So people who go to the Pratt program, it's very art heavy. Lots of studio art, lots of art making. They come out really strong in, a range of media. My program that I graduated from was in the psychology department in the College of Arts and Sciences, at a university. So I came out very strong with the clinical psych piece and not as strong as some of those Pratt graduates with all these different media. So we have to have somebody who kind of sets a bar, but there's still differences. And so some people come from the psychology background like I did. My undergrad major, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm indecisive, so I double majored in psychology and art history. So definitely more the psychology side. I didn't feel like I had the patience and the dedication to the craft to do the studio art major, but I know a lot of people who come from the studio art side.
Is that Pratt in New York or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And, I mentioned the licensure. In order to establish that, yes, we have the same master's level training as some of these other professions, we have to do those steps of keeping, some control over what goes into these training programs. So that's those two, issues are kind of tied together or related.
Are there people with very distant majors like biology that get into the program and can succeed, let's say if they get accepted to the master's program?
I'm sure that there are. I always think it's really fascinating when you meet people who have kind of, made a switch. I know that we have some psychiatrists and medical doctors who are members of our association, and I'm sure that some of them have gotten both degrees. What I see a lot actually is art therapists, so people who got a master's degree in art therapy and are now adding to their skill set all the neuroscience knowledge. That's been really a burgeoning field and has really changed a lot about what we know about how to treat certain things. And so, for example, at our national conferences, the neuroscience presentations are growing in number, and they're always kind of like standing room only because it's new information, it's really valuable, and we want to know it. Is that like a time thing? Okay, just checking.
No.
And continuing education, most professions, I'm sure you are familiar with that. We have to do continuing education. If any of you guys are really curious about our field, we do have an annual conference that this year is in Miami. So it's nice, it travels around the country, and this year, are you gonna go?
It's a bit expensive, so
Yeah.
let's see.
Yeah, that's our once a year kind of one-stop shop to go and get a lot of art therapy specific continuing education. So it's very content rich. It's very, very dense program, lots of 10-hour days and lots of sessions. So there's a lot in there. So what I thought I would do is give you guys some examples of the types of art therapy programs that I have personally been involved in. So we had that slide where we saw general places, but I wanted to tell you a little bit more specific. I do have client artwork in the presentation in the next few slides, and I do have their written consent. We talked about ethics. One of the founding beliefs really for art therapists is that whatever they create belongs to them. When I worked in the hospital, never did I ever put a piece of client artwork in a chart. Never. Might take it to a treatment team meeting to share an insight or to share some information, but I never put it in a chart. I don't know who's going to open the chart and look at it and if they have the right lens and what conclusions they're going to jump to. And I never assume that I retain ownership of something. It always, you made it, it's an extension of you, it's yours, what would you like to do with it? And anytime that I do use client artwork, you know, we all have a standard release that we ask people to sign saying, would it be okay if I used your artwork anonymously for things like writing an article or doing a workshop? And it's also standard language in there to say your consent for that is not required for you to keep receiving treatment here. You don't have to say yes to that, and you can change your mind. I might not be able to take back what's out there, but you could call me up 2 years from now and be like, you know what, I changed my mind, don't do it. So this program is called Healing with Art. The painting that you see there was made by someone who attended the program. It began in response to the school shooting in Parkland in February. And basically what happened is that particular museum is in very close proximity to that area. And they knew that they would have community members who were impacted, however directly or indirectly. They actually had a lot of students from Parkland who were volunteers at the museum or had taken part in different programs at the museum. And I had a relationship with the museum, and they reached out to me and said, what can we do? So we kind of did like an open art studio. So we just said, listen, the main gallery is going to be open from this time to this time every day for the week. Just drop in. And we coordinated so that we had volunteer therapists on site. We had therapy dogs. I had, I think, something like 20 art therapists over the space of the week who volunteered for different shifts. And it kind of just kept evolving. It started off as like, we're going to do this for the week. And then it was like, wow, people are still coming. School's not open. Can we do it for a few more days? And then it became a once a week event that's still ongoing. So that painting, like I mentioned, was someone who came during that initial first week. We did have some specific projects that we would recommend to people, but always left it open if someone had their own idea. And so this was this person's own idea. And the eagle, if you don't know, is like the school mascot there. We also partnered with an organization called Stars of Hope. And these are wooden stars that were purchased by us from Stars of Hope that people were invited to paint. And again, take with them if they so choose, or leave them behind where they would become part of an outdoor peace garden. And so over the course of that week, several people came in, and painted their own responses on the stars. I had a group of students, and I'll be really honest with you, I considered putting the photographs in and I decided not to because their whole faces were in the photograph, but it was really touching to me that this happened. We had a group of girls from the high school who were coming every day, and they got the idea that they wanted to paint 17 stars, one for each person. And they really got, they coordinated, I'm gonna paint the background and you're gonna paint this and then we're gonna do this. And then they took over this whole corner in the ceramic studio with, the last day they were in that corner with the blow dryers because they had to get them all finished and dried and varnished. And they actually took all 17 of them to the memorial. There was kind of that organic memorial that sprung up, and placed all of them there on the fence and came back to show me the picture on their phone of look, we took them and we placed them there at the site. So it was really great to be able to be part of an outlet for people, during that time. This was another image that someone made during that week. And I want to talk a little bit about one of the questions people sometimes have about art therapy is what does the session look like? What do we do? So I mentioned that sometimes, we let people choose what they want, but I always try to have an activity ready. I don't ever want anybody to feel, sometimes there's nothing more intimidating than that perfect piece of paper. And do I dare make a mark, and what am I supposed to do? So I always like to have a prompt or a directive ready. If someone's coming to you every week and it's an ongoing relationship, you'll have themes and things that you want them to work on. But I think it's important to leave people some leeway for whatever they might feel drawn, no pun intended, but they might feel drawn to create. I always tell my clients or participants in my group, I don't know what your day was like. It's great that I sat down and made a treatment plan and I think I know exactly what we're going to do tonight, but I haven't seen you in a week. I don't know what's happened. That may no longer be the most pressing thing on your mind. So in this case, this was what this person chose to do. And there are themes that you'll see in artwork, but art therapy is not an exact science. So it does not mean that if you doodle on the paper, I can come over there and tell you all these things about yourself. That is not how it works. Symbols and thought processes and color choices can be really, really individualized. So it's not like, oh, I can look at this painting and tell you, really specific things. There's general things you can tell, right? Someone's line pressure in a piece of art, if someone does this and rips through the paper, anybody can tell, right? That there's a lot of emotion behind that, but it's not like a really precise universal system. One of my favorite examples of that was an elderly woman who was drawing a picture with me one day, and she drew a bedroom and she drew a rope coming down from the ceiling, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's suicidal, this is like the news, she's gonna hang herself. And I just, I waited and she drew, and I was already thinking, who am I gonna call, who am I gonna tell? And when I asked her to explain the picture, she said when she was a little girl and they didn't have a chimney, so her parents told her that Santa came in the window on a rope and came down to her. I was like, oh. So, there's no like universal, you have to check with the person. I mean, that's how art is, right? What you see when you go in and look at a painting might not be what the artist intended, so you have to check with the person who created it. And this was our culminating project. We invited people to paint on these individual cutouts of feathers, and then at the end, they were combined into these wings that were hung on the gallery wall. And that program is still ongoing, so if any of you guys know any teens who would like to still attend something, I can give you the information on that. What I'm going to show you next, we're going to kind of switch populations and talk about a program called Art for Warriors. As you can probably tell by the name, this program is geared more at veterans. I mentioned earlier, Art Therapy and Veterans is a really well-established partnership. There's actually at the national level a partnership between the VA and the American Art Therapy Association to do some really solid research to back up what's kind of been anecdotal, what we've been seeing for a long time. And the VA has art therapists as a specific job title, and they try to hire art therapists in their centers. This program is, as you'll notice, it says community-based. So that's a little bit different. It means that these are veterans who are just out in the community. They're not necessarily like the gentleman with the painted mask who was in a really specific, structured, intensive treatment program. But our goal is still to provide support. One of the key things that research shows us veterans struggle with is connecting to civilians, especially if they are fairly recently deployed. And even if not, there's still that whole part of their lives that they feel like we kind of don't get. And if people are recently deployed and returning, they can struggle with identity. I knew what time to get up, I knew what I was doing, I knew what my purpose was. Now I'm done. I can't seem to find that same sense of purpose again. And so being able to have a place where they can connect and come with each other, whether we overtly talk about those issues or not, is very helpful. So let's give you a few examples. There, as you can see, they're working on a potter's wheel. I don't personally have the art expertise to teach someone how to use the potter's wheel, but I had access to a ceramics studio and a ceramics teacher, and so we just partnered, and I said, could you please come in and do a few weeks of this, because I know that there's something very therapeutic to using that medium, and my client's experience shouldn't be limited by what I can teach them, right? So it's my job to go out and say, what would be great, this, how can we make it happen? How many of you guys have ever done anything like on the wheel like that with clay? So I don't know what your experience was like, but when I was in grad school was the first time I tried that. And I already, was in art therapy training, and so I would approach all my art classes with that lens. And the first thing you have to do, right, you get the piece of clay, and what's the first thing you have to do when you try to put it on that wheel? Water. And you have to center it, right? You have to get it really nice and wet, and you have to what they call center the clay. And it's not that easy. and it takes a lot of, just kind of concentrating on how much pressure are you putting on the clay and how can you get it centered. And I remember just thinking, like, that's such a great metaphor, right? For how, like, we have to get centered. And I have to be centered in the way we use the word for ourselves and our focus if I'm going to get this clay physically centered. If I'm not thinking about it and I'm not responding to it, it's not going to work. So it's really interesting how different media can lend themselves to different skills or lessons. So this was just a different sample project. These are small wooden tokens that in this case most people choose to paint, but you can tell some of them were magazine images that were cut out and collaged. And the idea was to make something that you could take with you that was a positive message, or that you could even, distribute to other people. So the veterans came in and they each made like 3 to 5 of these, and then chose, okay, maybe this is the one that I'm going to keep in my pocket or in my car as my reminder, but now I have a way to kind of pass on a positive message to someone else. Literally a token of whatever, a token of gratitude or a token of love. So the art projects don't always have to be, here's an easel and let's paint. You can branch out quite a bit. And the gentleman in this painting, you can see by his hat on the table, was a Vietnam veteran. So again, when we think about art and trauma and veterans, we tend to think about recent deployments and people who are freshly returned. But there are definitely, even for people who served that long ago, they definitely still have things that they can't talk to just anybody about, or things that they've never really explored or discussed. This gentleman, one of the pieces that we made was a mask, like the one you saw in the National Geographic picture. So they made this white mask and they got to paint it however they wanted. And he painted his to look like a regular face, like if it had a white bandage around it, right? And so I said, oh, well, tell me a little bit about that. I just did that because, the way the plaster was on the mask, it kind of had a ridge there, so I thought, oh, I'll make it a bandage. And I, okay, that's why you did it. He goes, yeah. So I said, well, now that you've done it and you look at it, does it remind you of anything? Well, I don't know, not really. Well, maybe about that time that, they blew my ear off and I lost a little piece of my skull and they had to wrap my head in a bandage like that. But really it was just because there was this ridge in the plaster on the mask. That's why I painted that. And I was like, okay, right? He couldn't yet really even articulate the connection between what he painted and what he remembered, but it was there, right? And that project gave him a way to kind of take that image, hopefully maybe take it out of his mind and get a little distance from it, even though it had been, all those years ago. Sometimes just getting a little distance from it on paper is a great metaphor to people for getting distance from it in their lives. And it's getting containment. If I can get it out of my head and onto a piece of paper or onto a canvas or onto a mask, somehow I feel like I've contained it a little bit more. And this is another veteran who, very artistic, and actually was doing stained glass on her own, and so we let her bring her stuff in and work on it there. And she actually told me one day, she didn't come one week, and then the next week, I was like, oh, we missed you, how were you? And she said, she struggled a lot with trauma and physical and medical things and TMJ with her jaw and anxiety and not being able to sleep. And she said, I didn't sleep for 2 days. And I finally slept. And I said, I'm going to wake up and go to that group. I'm not going to miss that. And she's like, and when I'm done, I'm going to go back probably and go to sleep. But this, I won't miss. Which is a big testament to what that opportunity to express yourself can really mean for people. especially if you can do it outside of a therapy office, like an art gallery or a community center. You know, people are, that's kind of a warmer setting for a lot of people. So we did do a small client art exhibit based on that program with the veterans. And I put a little note to myself down here about which particular pieces in this picture I wanted to talk to you guys about. So this is the mask that I mentioned to you with the bandages. And you see the one eye that's shut, that was the side that his injury, you know, had been on all those many years ago. And if you notice the mask up at the top, the black portion is actually a profile of the face within the face. So I thought that was really neat that he managed to design and create his mask that way. And return of color. So this artwork that's all yellow and sunlit was done by a woman who joined the group, and at the time that she joined the group, she said, you know, I've always painted, I've always done art, I love art, but she said, you know, I haven't painted in color in years. She had been part of the response to 9/11, and she said, you know, really, that and some other things she had gone through had really just kind of taken so much out of her that even when she returned to her art, it was all kind of, you know, drab and black and white. And coming to the group and getting the, you know, kind of license to create and to explore, she found herself, you know, going back to color. So that was a really meaningful piece to her, which is why she wanted to show it. And the landscape up at the top, can you see with the purple hills? And one of the activities we did was I invited people to do a landscape based on an important time or place in their lives, right? A landscape that kind of represented something. So if I draw you a picture of a sunny beach, that's a very different feeling than if I draw you a picture of a dark forest. So I said, you know, just pick a landscape that kind of matches something about you or your life. And this gentleman created that landscape, and he says, you know, it reminds me of a really peaceful time in my life when I lived in the Carolinas and those beautiful blue hills, and talked a lot about how peaceful it was. And later on, after a couple of months, we were talking about the impact of the program again. And he said, you know, it's interesting. I've been thinking about that painting and that time. And he said, you know, I cried in the car on the way home that night after that painting. And he goes, I really wasn't even sure why. And he said, but you know, you know, we keep talking about it, coming back to it. And he said, that was a really happy time for me, but I'm sad that I don't have the things in my life now that I had then. So it's kind of sad too, and it kind of hurts, it kind of cuts. And I pointed out to him, I said, do you realize that you have that red, you have that, like, one little spot of like, this little red, you know, I don't know, is that the pain? Is that the wound? Is that the what's missing? Like, it was there in the picture. And he was like, you know, yeah, it was there all along. So sometimes, you know, the unconscious or what we're thinking or how we're problem solving, it can kind of come out in different ways. And art really can facilitate that. You know, it's another language. And then maybe eventually your brain catches up with the words, right? But it can come out this way first. And Connected, this one down here with all the hearts, was painted by an older gentleman in the group. And over the course of several sessions, it took this form. And he said that for him, it represented a network of veterans that he was friends with. And one of them had had a medical, you know, they were older, one of them had had like a medical challenge with his heart. But that they were all, you know, they would all check in on each other and they were all kind of connected. And so that was his way of commemorating that feeling. So client art exhibits are potentially very beneficial. They give people a new identity. That veterans group, I've loved, like if I'm late to group, They don't need me. There's new people there and they're like showing them where the paints are. I come in and there's like, they're set up, they're painting already, they're good to go. They have a new identity. They started off like, I don't know what to do with this art stuff. I don't know what to do with this art room. And now they identify as artists, right? I can come in here and get my own paint and get the canvas out, and I know what I want to do, and I know how to start. And when you can exhibit someone's work, you really solidify for them that new identity. And it goes back to that strength-based. Let's start from what you can do. Maybe they never thought they could make a piece of art. Maybe they never thought they could make a piece of art that anybody would want to see or that would go up on a wall. And so it's a big self-esteem boost. It's a nice change in self-perception. And hopefully, you know, my biggest goal is that people pick up something that they can use for their own relaxation, for their own stress relief. So, questions? Yeah.
It ultimately sounds, I mean, very rewarding, obviously, but also incredibly heavy and emotional. Is it hard to kind of process those emotions after these sessions?
That's a really important thing to think about. One of the things that happens, and this is true of any mental health, therapist, I think, is you get trained to do this, but you have to figure out your limits. Every therapist that I know has certain populations that they're like, nope, I don't think I could handle or manage that for a host of reasons. And that's one of the ways that you manage that. I remember when I worked in a psychiatric hospital, but it was also part of a regular medical hospital. And I started having my kids while I worked there, and I would hear those like code alerts for like pediatric things, and I would think, there's no way now that I have kids that I think I emotionally could work in some of those settings. So everybody finds their kind of, their comfort level with certain things, and self-care. Vicarious traumatization is a real thing. Therapists who work really closely with people with lots of trauma can absolutely develop a lot of the symptoms. And so there's a lot of self-care if you're going to work in a really traumatic setting or population that you have to do. And people come up with lots of ways to balance. I know for me, in the immediate aftermath of Parkland, when I was working in that setting and seeing a lot of those students and hearing some of those stories, I stopped watching the news because I was like, I can only feed myself so much of this, right? So I stopped watching the news, and I remember even, I'm an avid reader, and there was a book that was really popular at the time, and a friend of mine who reads, we were talking online, and she was like, oh, you really have to read Educated. It's just a really great book. And in the discussion, I was like, okay, and then someone mentioned that she has like a trauma history that she talks about in the book, and I said, I can't read that right now. I have enough. I have enough trauma. I'll read that next year. So you do have to kind of balance and take a breath sometimes. And you do burn out. I worked in a psychiatric hospital for 3 years, and I loved it, but it was very, very intense. And I was like, okay, that's it. I'm good. So you have to pay attention to that. But it shouldn't be a deterrent if you're thinking of a helping profession, because you can find your own balance and you can find your own place, and you can work in a very community and wellness-oriented setting as well. That's within art therapy has become, the therapists who work that way have really been raising their voice and saying, don't only talk about clinical populations and things. Talk about those of us who are just working from a wellness perspective before people are really, really struggling. I think I'll borrow a phrase. I used to work in a historic house, historic museum, home that had become a museum. And, we would need like to raise funds to fix the beautiful marble wall, and everybody wanted to donate to that. And then we would be like, we need to fix the roof, and nobody wanted to donate to that, and my boss would say, it's the sexy projects that get the money. And I think that happens with populations and with stories, right? We get drawn to the intensity of certain things, but yeah, absolutely, there are therapists who work in really positive environments too. So, other questions?
It sounds like you have to have a master's. I have a bachelor's, but, okay.
Yeah, you do. Most professions have what they call like the working degree. So for example, a master's is a working degree. You don't have to have the doctorate. And in some other fields, it's like for example, for OTs, for occupational therapists, a bachelor's degree is the working degree. So in this field, it does tend to be the master's degree. And again, that's the parity with the other mental health professionals. So what we think of as like, I'm going to a therapist, in Florida, that's probably a licensed mental health counselor. That person has a master's. It could be a licensed clinical social worker. That person has a master's. So that is definitely the
What is the
requirement.
salary range?
According to online, anywhere from 30 to 80. I would say if someone asked me, I would probably say right in the middle of that. If you're working somewhere full time and you've been there for a while, I think, 40, 45 sounds about right to me. It's been a long time since I've worked somewhere full time as an art therapist.
What do you do full time?
I've been doing art for a lot of my art therapy career, I've been working part-time or as an independent contractor. And again, that's one of the things, even back when I was majoring in psychology, one of the things that always appealed to me was that this was a field where you could have a private practice and work a flexible schedule and work evenings and things like that. You have to, whatever you do, you have to find your strengths and your weaknesses. And I do not do well with routine. I have my own executive functioning challenges. Those are EF skills, executive functioning skills. And I don't do well with routine. I do a group every week, right? And every week I'm like, I'm going to do the deep breathing at the beginning of the group. That's how we're going to start the group. Every week everybody shows up and I'm like, hey, and we start talking and we start making art. And then I'm like, oh, we're going to do the deep breathing, we'll do it at the end. I don't do well with routines. And so a job that allowed me to work as an independent contractor was great. So that's what I did. What that means is I would seek out agencies in the community, for example, substance abuse treatment centers, and approach them and say, listen, I know that you have a treatment program for clients, and I'm an art therapist, and here's why art therapy could really help this population. And you don't need to hire a full-time art therapist. All you need to do is say, I would love for art therapy to be part of the weekly rotation of things that my clients get, and I'll come in once a week, and I'll do an art therapy group for your clients. So that's what I did for a very long time, just like a few different contracts. So I might be, over here with this population on Monday and over here on Tuesday. So that's why I say that. It's been a long time since I worked like full-time for one person as an art therapist.
Doing that, you're pretty much working full time for you.
Yeah, and actually, when I had a full-time job, and when I left it, I said I was going to do that, and they were like, nobody wants you to leave your job, right? So you're not going to make, and I was like, actually, I'm going to work less and make the same thing. Because when you're working for someone fewer hours, right, they're like, okay, we'll pay you this much an hour. As opposed to when someone's like, you're going to be here 40 hours a week, I can't multiply that times 40. So it's nice and flexible, and you can still support yourself, even if you're working in a flexible way. So I don't have any misgivings about telling people to try the profession. I should mention too, back in the beginning slide when I was talking about what's the current state of our profession, politics and political affiliations aside, we do have the second lady, Karen Pence, has chosen art therapy as her platform. Wow. She's particularly enamored of art therapy with children and with veterans. And so for us, as a profession that some people may not even have heard of, to have potentially kind of a national level of attention on it could be really beneficial to getting more people to know what it is, getting more agencies to pay attention to it, maybe getting more funding for it. The program that I mentioned, Tracy's Kids, the program for art therapy for children with cancer, was a program apparently that she was involved with before she became second lady, and so she's kind of carried that interest on. So as a profession, again, that's another example of increased attention to what this field can do. And I mentioned also the TED Talk. That was very exciting for us that Melissa got, a TED Talk. So there's more attention. We got the cover of National Geographic last year with the mask. So there's definitely more attention being paid. And I think it's because, like I said, it's really powerful. The results are very powerful. And whether you're looking at it from like, oh, I want to help people and this is powerful, or if you're looking at it from, I need to be really efficient with healthcare funds and this is powerful, either way, it doesn't matter what avenue you take, you're going to get to what's most impactful, and helpful to people. So, any other questions?
Where's your center based? You said that you have a center?
It's in Tamarack. It's on Turnpike and Commercial Boulevard. I am a mom of 3, and I started homeschooling my kids several years ago, so that's what this kind of grew out of. And word travels fast when 2 therapists open a learning center. Everybody's like, what? I can send instead of having to try to explain to a school system or a teacher how to deal with a child, I can send them to a therapist who's used to dealing with a child, and okay. So that's what we really specialize in now. So small, flexible, individualized learning, and a lot of therapy kind of woven throughout the day. So.
One last thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure for a lot of people that aren't necessarily like verbal learners, or I'm sure there's a real word for that, seeing like kind of a physical manifestation of their treatment, I'm sure that's very beneficial for a lot of people. Do you find that it helps some people more than others to have something to take with them to remind them of kind of the conversation?
Yeah. So a few things I would follow up on there. Yes, it can be really important to have a visual record for people of their treatment. It can be, as you're pointing out, an important reminder to them of things that they have gained or learned. If you're fortunate enough as a therapist where you're going to have the same client, either they're coming to you individually or they're going to be, like for example, in the treatment center for 3 months, typically what we'll do is we'll actually make them a portfolio and ask them to date their work on the back so that periodically you can take it out and you can look at what has the transition been. And they can really see, like you're saying, their recovery. We oftentimes, are our own worst critics, and we don't really see sometimes the gains and things that we've made. And so when I can put someone's artwork out on the table and they can watch their progression, it can really reinforce for them how much work they've done. It can also help with the fact that sometimes we like to take back things that we said, right? Maybe we get to talk in tonight and I let you know that this and this really bothers me. And then the next time I see you, I'm going to pick on you because I know your name. Carl is like, hey, so whatever happened with that fight with your husband? I'm like, oh, it's no big deal. I brought it up. Don't worry about it. If I'm in a therapy situation with a client and I feel like something important has come out and it's in their art and I revisit it, I can use that artwork as a prompt, right? To say, well, I know that you're saying that you don't really want to talk about it or it's not that important, but in your artwork, that thing that you said represents it is taking up half the page. Do you remember that? So it can be a tool to be able to refer people back to. And to your question about do I find it helps some people more than others, I think there's a perception that you should be artistic or artistically talented to be like a great art therapy client. And I actually find that it either has no bearing or those are actually more difficult clients to work with. Because if you're very artistically talented, you can get sidetracked in the beauty and the aesthetics of what it looks like. And one of the sayings that we talk about a lot in art therapy is it's not about the product for us, it's about the process. And that's a key difference between an art class or an art teacher and an art therapist. When I see students at my learning center, I have a foot in both worlds. I might be teaching them about an artist or a thing, but I know their challenges, and so I'm kind of going to focus more on the process. Can they follow the directions? That might be my goal. Can you follow directions? Can you come in and sit down and wait till I give you the crayons? Mission accomplished. Whatever you want to draw with it is fine. Or can I, for example, I might have 2 or 3 students coming together, and I might only put, maybe I have 2 students working together, and are you guys brother and sister? So if they're working on a project together, it goes a lot smoother moment. They each have their own box of markers, right? Right. So do you know what we do? We have 20 boxes of markers in the closet, and we only put one on the table, right? If I have a student who needs to work on sharing, we used to work on social skills, right? If I have a student that doesn't like to speak or verbalize or doesn't interact with others, I might set that up. And so now my goal is I'm not as worried about how beautiful your picture is at the end. I'm trying to facilitate for you and set up a situation where, can you ask for the red when you need it? Things like that. So sometimes if you're really artistically talented, I actually had only once, but I had a client as part of she was in a treatment center that I went to every week and did groups. She was very artistically talented and she loved art. And I actually eventually we basically forbade her from doing art because she was really able to defend, right? I was saying the opposite. Most of us can't defend in art. We're not used to that. We're used to, how are you doing? Fine. That's my script. That's what I say. So you can't know how I'm really doing. I don't know how to do that in art. I don't know what color to choose that doesn't show you something or what is going to come out. If you're really artistically talented, you're going to come in and paint me beautiful pictures that are complete blown and that don't tell me anything about how you're really feeling. So yeah, I had one time where we actually met as a team and they were like, she's doing art all the time. She does it before your group, after your group. She doesn't go to other things. She just does art. And I was like, okay, we're going to tell her, no more art. You have to start talking now because she was kind of doing, the other. So. Anything else?
Did you say you were working with Alzheimer's, Steve?
Yes, I have in the past.
How is the attention span in that group?
It varies a lot. So it's a progressive, illness, and so in some of the settings, I was only seeing people once a month, and so it would really depend on where they were in their stage, and it depended on what I brought them if it clicked for them or not. I really think that working with that population raises big, meaning of life questions for you because now you're trying to connect with this person. And it sounds like I'm being dramatic, but it really makes you think about what makes a person a person. What am I really trying to connect with? What if you can't tell me? I sit down and what do you do? What if you can't tell me that anymore? And so you have to really just focus on a moment of connection.
Because attention span is short.
Yes, they can come in and out. I had one lady who would often not participate and kind of have her head down, but she would clap sometimes, just clap. And so I would just kind of crouch down on her level and sometimes I would just clap. And she would look up, right? If I got into her rhythm, she would look up and look at me for a second and we would clap for a few times and then that was it. And I was like, okay, that was it. But at least for that little moment, somebody connected with her or heard her. And I definitely had other clients who were more able to really use the art to process what they were losing, who knew I'm not able to think the way I used to. I used to go to a center for people with Alzheimer's and I would have this one table, right? And so the staff would bring me a group and we'd sit here. But there might be 10 or 15 other clients that were still milling around. And I was working with a group one day and there was one patient who was extremely agitated and she kept going to the door and pushing on the door and wanting to leave and wanting to go and really, just kind of all worked up. So when I was done with my group, I asked the staff, because again, they're there every day, right? I'm not. So I asked the staff, do you think it'd be okay if I tried to sit with her? And they were like, sure, try. So she was sitting at a table for a minute, but still really agitated. So I sat down next to her And I just kind of spread out, we've been doing collage, I just kind of spread out all my magazine pictures and kind of, acted like I wasn't really there to talk to her. I just happened to sit next to her and have all these pictures out on the table. And as I was doing that, she leaned over and she grabbed one of the magazine pictures, and it was like from an ad for some drug, some medication. And it was a picture of a woman's face, but over her face there was a giant, question mark. And she grabbed the picture and she said, she like pointed at it, she was like, she doesn't know where she is, and she doesn't know where she's supposed to be, and she doesn't know what's going on. And I was like, oh, and again, just briefly for a couple minutes, we just talked about, not about her, right, about the woman in the picture. We just talked about, that's really hard, and she must feel really confused, and I'm not gonna pretend that and she was cured and the rest of her day was great, but it gave her an outlet, right, that she could not have found the words to say, I'm so upset because I don't know where I am and I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. Even if we had said, what's going on, what's wrong, she wouldn't have been able to put that thought together. But as luck would have it, there was an image that she could see, right, that she could say like this is it, this is where I'm at. And then I was then able to go to the staff and say, listen, she's having a really rough day, here's what she indicated, here's what she pointed out, so this is kind of where she's at. So a lot of times, it becomes a communication tool for me, and as well as something I can take back to staff. I had that experience at times in the hospital too, where I could take a piece of artwork in and say, sometimes positive, but usually the other way around. Or someone might be giving, kind of some outward signs of like, okay, let's go, let's discharge, we're done. I remember I had a client that drew a giant wave, ocean wave, and a little person this big. And he drew it on dark construction paper, and if you've ever, it's hard to see colors on that dark paper, right? And he took a peach marker and he wrote help on the black construction paper. You could hardly see it. And that I remember was, a piece of artwork that, like I said, I would never put in someone's file, but that I went and I said, okay, listen, here's what this person did, and, here's what, this is obviously an indication that maybe what they're saying to you is not exactly how they're feeling or exactly what's happening. And not every day that I go to work is, amazing and transformative like that. And I offer that caveat because I go to these art therapy presentations at these conferences and I feel like, God, these people have these amazing days, they do these amazing things, but that's not every day, but that is definitely there. And I think those days happen because of all the other days. You have to build a rapport with people and you have to provide the place and the opportunity for it, and then you're there when it's time for something like that, to happen. So sorry, I left your Alzheimer's question a
That's
little
okay.
bit, but I
That's
hope
all right.
I
That's okay.
answered it.
Just curious.
Sometimes it helps them bring up a memory. You can ask them to draw a house and you'll get memories of a home they lived in. Sometimes it helps them express a feeling, or sometimes it's even less verbal or less thought-based than that. It's just a little connection. Maybe they just enjoy the paint for a minute. So it just depends. Okay, anything else? I can talk about art therapy all night, so you guys have to do it. Okay, it's time for everybody to wrap it up.
Questions? No?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Two rounds of applause. Thank you so much.